So, yeah, security and accessibility, what could they possibly have in common? So, my name is Mike Gifford, and I'm the president of Open Concept Consulting. I'm the Drupal 8 core accessibility maintainer. I'm going to spearhead most of the work on Drupal 7's accessibility, and the team that's been involved in taking that on since about 2009. So have learned a lot through that process, and I found that it was a really great experience to try and to learn about accessibility and the complexity of accessibility issues. I also organize accessibility camps. There's an accessibility end conference that happens in Ottawa. There's one that happens in Los Angeles and in Tokyo and Toronto and Washington, D.C., and in a few other places. And they're really great events and opportunities to try and learn more about accessibility. But we were also involved in creating this security guide that we set up, and it's I think it's still the most comprehensive Drupal 7/8 Drupal security reference out there. There's a lot of other security references out there. There's blog posts, there's videos. There's still cracking cracking Drupal, which is Gregel's book. Lots of good resources there. There's so much available on PHP and server hardening, but we wanted to try and take what was available and try and distill it down into a simple list of things that people can do. Something that's written partially for managers, partly for web developers, partly for your system administration people, and had steps that you can do to sort of harden your system along the way. And have sort of step-by-step guides for this. We got into doing that because Canada's spy agency, CSIS, went and it got, well, they didn't actually upgrade their Drupal versions. They went to a contractor, they had a Drupal site built, they threw it up on the server, and they ignored it. And I kept sending them emails and trying to reach out to them and saying, hey, this is a really big idea, or a big problem, your site's going to get compromised, and eventually it did. I was worried at one point that they might actually be using that as a trap to try and encourage hackers to try and break into their system and try and see who are the people who are actually good at who would want to break into like what hacker wouldn't want to try to break into the CIA's recruitment hiring platform? I mean, it's a golden target for so many people. And I thought maybe they're smart enough that they're setting this up to try and poach people who are either really good hackers that they would want to hire, or really bad hackers that they want to try and go off and isolate and put away and sort of pull off the government.
Big honeypot.
Yeah, gigantic honeypot. Unfortunately, it wasn't. And when it made the page 6 of the Globe and Mail, like one of our national newspapers, and there's articles on it suddenly was a priority, and we got brought in to look at the security of their site and to bring it up and to address the server issues and Drupal issues, and to write a guide to try and help educate them and others about the importance of security. And that's up here. It's openconcept.ca/Drupal-security. And it's we decided to not only write it for CSIS, our security agency, but also to have it and open source this as much as possible so that we could encourage others to go off and participate. And so we've had input from a number of other security experts who have given us guidance and direction on things that we didn't include and things that we can do better. And there's a lot of ideas about links to go off and to improve your site security and ways that you can find ways to isolate isolate the attack vectors and try and make your system as robust as possible. But we're not going to go through that point by point. We're going to try and talk about why would I consider in the first place that accessibility and security have anything in common. The idea actually came to me for the first time when I was talking to somebody at IBM. This is an old IBM card sorter, and she was an upper management at IBM and was responsible for both roles, and it didn't make any sense to me. And then she sort of talked to me about some of the ways that some of the similarities and some of the advantages that IBM had of trying to sort of combine these ideas together and to try and have a more holistic perspective on both of these separate these otherwise distinct issues. So when we think about things, like when we think about accessibility is about helping people, especially helping others, people who are less fortunate, who don't have as much access. And security is about trying to go off and fight against bad people, right? I mean, that's really what we're looking at, is trying to go off and exclude those bad people. And so we have these sort of mindsets. These must be completely different things. One's trying to help the good, one's trying to stop the bad. And there's even if you look at the World Wide Web Consortium, there's guidance and direction on both. The WC3 has the Web Accessibility Initiative, which has a lot of great guidelines on how to go off and make your site perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. There's also the WC3's Web Application Security Group, and there's a mailing list there, and there's opportunities to sort of discuss with other people who are leaders in the world about the best practices and approaches for web security. And if you're IBM, then you're going to be involved in both of those committees because you have enough of a presence and enough of a mandate that you're going to want to have an influence in both. I have other fun examples. How many of you have seen a Canadian dollar? Okay, the new ones are plastic, which is kind of an entertaining thing because it's this is real money that's actually worth something, but it's plastic, and there's some real advantages to plastic money which I hadn't thought of before. But it does make it more difficult to counterfeit because you can see through the money, and because there's holograms done on the inside. And because if you shine a laser through it, then the numbers show up on the other side. And they've done other little funky things that have, with this, that have made it as secure as they can for a type of physical transaction. But they've also done things for accessibility. And again, trying to find ways to blend these ideas together and see how they can work together. So what bill is this? Yeah, so you can see it from, fair ways away. Could you do that with an American bill? Maybe.
Depends on whose side you're looking at.
Some are bigger than others, and whether they're newer or older, but this is like they have a high contrast built in to go off and make sure, if you're blind, the Canadian dollar bill has Braille on it. So you can actually go off and have a distinct divot that's available that you can see, and it's up there is where the Braille is. You can feel which bill you're dealing with. The Australian bill, which is this is what it's the Canadian dollar is modeled off of, is even better because it actually has different sizes. So you have if your small bills, I think, are a smaller size, and the larger your denomination gets, the bigger it is. So you can feel and sort and stack those very easily. So if you're trying to sort of find money in your wallet, you can find where that is without any difficulty. And of course, you've got different colors as well. So this is a 5, a 10, and a 20. So reproducing different patterns, but trying to highlight things like high contrast, large fonts, making it as easy as possible to go off and to make accessible, but also to make it as secure as possible, to build this into a common interface that's there. That being said, even with all of these safeguards, this bill isn't going to be accessible to everyone. It's also not going to be 100% secure. People are counterfeiting these bills, even though they've got so many different pieces in them to try and highlight them. This is not a completely secure form of currency. It's pretty good. It's probably not as good as Bitcoin, but it's pretty good. And I think that in terms of having a physical system to go off and evaluate money, I don't know that there's that many other examples out there of currency that go off and incorporate accessibility and security in them. So I think it is one of the leading examples of this. They're both of these areas are trying and to address security and accessibility are highly technical. How big does that 20 need to be? How do you try and make sure that there's sufficient color contrast so that it fits with the style guide of this grumpy queen and fits and is also easily perceivable from wherever you are in the room. They're very much, there's experts involved in the accessibility fields as well as in the security fields. And often those experts have different opinions. I think I kind of think that the accessibility world is is better for this. I'm not entirely sure. I think that you're probably going to find more. The accessibility world tends to communicate more effectively together with each other. It's more in the open. There's a mandate of trying to communicate with each other and share your best experience, and things like the unconference that I'm facilitating, that I'm a contributor to and an organizer of, that helps to try and take those best practices and build them together, and to help us all learn best practices and to keep up with the technology, because it's changing so quickly. There are other forms of that type of conference, like in the security world, but I don't think they're quite as many, and they're not necessarily. I think that they're more like the guilds that you sort of get into when you spend time learning to hack into systems and trying to sort of learn the arts of being a white hat hacker, or they're not necessarily geared in a way that encourages people to be educated and learn, and to sort of come and join our community. We want you to go off and be the best white hat hacker you can possibly be. Like it's a different kind of feeling and venue that's part of that. But with both of them, you're going to have people who have very different opinions about ways to go off and to secure things. Between Drupal and WordPress, as we were discussing just before the session, the WordPress folks are very convinced that by allowing the CMS to go off and write to the file system, that they're going to be able to have more sites that are more secure than Drupal, where you're not going to be able to have the CMS update itself. And so there's questions where we're going to have to see as a community and evaluate which method is the best. Is it better overall to have people have complete and total control of the security of their infrastructure, and ensure that they set up the best social mechanisms that they can to see that their site is updated and maintained over time? Or is it better to assume that people aren't going to bother with that, and to take some reduction in the security of your infrastructure to see that your site takes care of that itself, and there's an automated system that can just be dealt with and people can turn on and forget about. Certainly a lot of operating systems are set up that you almost don't have to think about them anymore. I mean, I guess Macs are a bit better than that. Most systems have systems where you are reminded to go off and to restart your system and update these things every once in a while, but they're done in the background. People aren't expected to go off and to be watching the operating system security list every week and sort of do a download and a pull on a regular basis to update their operating system with their phone. It's something that's done in the background and that you may have to approve, but generally it's something that users are guided through and is fairly automated. So it's also really hard to go out and find security experts in both. There's a lot of people who have some knowledge of security and some knowledge of accessibility, but to have somebody who knows the subjects, either one of the subjects deeply, is not easy, and they're hard to come by, and there's a lot more in terms of understanding Drupal and accessibility. There's nobody on the planet who's done as much and has understood how we got to where we are with Drupal 8 than I do. I've done, being involved in pretty much every issue in the Drupal accessibility queue that there is, on one level or the other. But that doesn't mean that I am the global expert on web accessibility. It's such a deep issue, and there's so many different ways that Everett Zufeld, one of the other, every time I talk with him and talk with him about various different issues and learning things from him and from other people, as I was talking with Catherine McNally, but after the keynote and talking to her and realizing things about the deaf community that I didn't understand and things that I could learn from. And it's the same thing with security. There's a lot of different layers to it, and you can't necessarily. You're going to have people who have expertise that's in very different corners, and that you might have somebody who understands this corner of security or that corner of security, but there's nobody who's going to understand it all. It's just too big of a field to have people who are knowledgeable about all pieces of it for all of the software platforms that are out there. Other commonalities, any custom-built applications are probably going to be less secure and less accessible. Again, because there just aren't enough people who understand these subjects well, and some of these things do take trial and error to walk through. And just knowing that Drupal 7 has had so many people walk through and evaluate the system and had learned from the experience of people who are reporting different problems that we can contribute and to learn from, that's been really useful. And again, with the security side as well, there's a lot that we've been able to learn from by having a very broad sweeping number of people that are using it and thinking about different ways that Drupal can be compromised. You got a question?
Yeah, it seems that talking to a few people, they seem to think that WordPress is almost the opposite. Custom-built applications are more secure, that the plugins and scripts aren't as vetted as well as they are in the Drupal community. Do you get that sense?
I think it depends on what the business model is between the plugins and the modules.
Well, plugins that come from, who knows, foreign countries and then maybe have time bombs in them, maybe 2 years now they'll go and harvest sites.
I mean, well, where are you getting your modules? So if in Drupal.org, if you're only pulling your modules off Drupal.org, there's a security team that allows you to evaluate that, and that's I think a really useful thing that you can have that structure. But often modules aren't staffed well enough so that you have essentially a perpetual alpha, or the number of times in Drupal 7 that of being told, oh, we just use the Git version of the code, or we just use the dev version. It's like, well, that's not good enough, because that isn't a secure, stable release that you can refer back to, and that when there's a patch or a problem with the security, that you can simply go off and refer to that single point of access, or that common set of code base, and work from it. So, Drupal's really fallen down, our community's fallen down, because there isn't enough incentive for our community to go off and invest in the modules to see that they're well maintained. Within WordPress, a lot of those modules are going to have a commercial incentive behind them that allows them to go off and to maintain them well, and to see that features are being maintained and updated regularly. And for a well-used module, you can have a module like the date module that has 3,000 open issues or something in it, and who knows what problems might be part of the date module, and we all use it at one level or other, but we know it's not as well maintained as we want it to be. If you had a module that had, or a plugin in WordPress that had that much coverage and the people were charging for it, there would be an incentive to go off and to have that be well maintained, because there's a structure to go off and to pay for that, and there isn't in Drupal. So there's no black and white issue as to which is more secure or less secure. There's going to be certain advantages for some and disadvantages for others, and ultimately with any software you want to have a critical mass of people looking at the software and using the software and investing in the software and having external reviews of the software to see that the software that they're running is as secure and reliable as possible. It is a lot easier in Drupal to go off and if you have a budget for security, to go off and invest in doing a third-party review of, the Drupal Get module was discovered because of a third-party review, as I understand. So it wasn't something that the Drupal community itself went off and identified. It was something that was done by or discovered by a third-party review of that module, or that of core. And there should be published third-party reviews of the top 100 modules out there. I don't think there are. I don't think there are in WordPress either, but we should have. That's the kind of stuff that I would like to be able to see in terms of having a security program that we can rely on. But unfortunately, for both accessibility and security, there's rarely enough time to go off and see that it's done properly. They're almost always left to the last. You got to go off and have those features developed. You kind of assume that accessibility and security are going to be there. There's a few people who care about it passionately and try and go off and address both security issues and the accessibility issues, but it's something that is often not given as much attention as it should have, because it's complicated and it's changing all the time. Like you could have a website now that is as secure as it possibly could be. And there's nothing to say that next week there isn't going to be a major security release that's announced that will indicate that your whole website could be compromised, just like with the Drupal. Like you have to have constant vigilance on both security and accessibility, because these things change. So yeah, both of them also involve lawsuits, which is also something that, you know, if you've gone and I don't actually know if there's a class action lawsuit against LinkedIn yet, but you know, after they was 100 million emails and passwords were released from LinkedIn a while back, including Mark Zuckerberg's email and his password. Does anyone know what Mark Zuckerberg's password was for? I think it wasn't for Twitter. It was for one of the big sort of social media sites.
Password?
His password.
His password?
No, it was da. It's just so that's what he used as a password, and his site got compromised, and he was able to go off and reclaim that because it's Mark Zuckerberg, and you know, it was a verified account, and I'm sure it was something that he could you know, work, you know, make sure that problem went away. But it was his email and password were verified, and people, you know, use that password to get into the account and compromise it and post information as Mark Zuckerberg. And this is something which is hard to really think is possible from somebody who's such an enormous leader in the internet world. But he's also not somebody who cares all that much about privacy. So I think that with so many reasons to go off and to look at these joint these problems of security and accessibility, because there are commonalities in terms of how we approach these issues. I think there's a lot that can be done to try and think about our development process and try and find ways to deal with that differently. So this is a guy, a veteran that has turned his wheelchair into, or has gotten a wheelchair donated to him that has Caterpillar treads and a snowplow attachment, so that he can go around and clean the sidewalks and whatnot, and feel like he's a useful contributing neighbor to society. I want to talk a little bit about some of the history of the American Disability Act as I understand it. As a Canadian, my understanding is a little bit different, but I think that, you know, generally people don't sort of understand why they should care about accessibility or how why accessibility matters. And there's all kinds of reasons that people come up to think about this, but a huge part of the initial movement around organizing for the American Disability Act was in trying to support the veterans that came back from the First and Second World War. And there was a need to try and the veterans rightly felt that after going to war and serving their country, that they should have some kind of accommodation after they had lost limbs or being involved in losing other things in the process of you know, fighting for their companies. And having rehabilitation and help them finding ways to help them enter back into the workforce and be a productive member of society after the First and Second World War was a really driving issue. Now, we didn't actually get in the U.S. the Americans with the Disability Act until 1990, but it was a huge effort, largely from I'm not entirely from veterans, but you know, that was a large contingent of them. And again, that tie between security and accessibility, because there's risks. If you're fighting, you know, whether it's global security or national security, there's risks involved in maintaining security, and sometimes people get hurt. So at least 1 in 10 people have disabilities, and as the baby boomer population is increasing, that number is getting bigger and bigger. Hopefully we'll all live a very long time, but as the longer we live, the more likely it is that our abilities are going to get worse. And biologically we know that our eyes are going to get worse, our motion control is going to get less, our ability to focus is going to get reduced, and that we are biological creatures that are over time wearing down. And so there's a certain amount of self-interest that is involved in looking at web accessibility issues. You have also things with the everyone knows what Section 508 is? So Section 508 was what the Web Act that came out of the ADA, the American Disability Act, and that it was published in 1997 and it's completely out of date at this point. It's essentially useless, except that some people still go off and refer to it. But even those people who refer to it should be should be disregarding that, because the Department of Justice federally has started to look at WK 2.0 AA. So that's the international standard that everyone else in the world is looking at. So if anyone else goes off and says to you, this has to be Section 508 compliant, it's like, well, no, it doesn't, because that's not what the Department of Justice is saying right now. Right now they're saying it has to be WK 2.0 AA, which means a whole bunch of people need to learn new skills and new tasks in order to be able to save your institution from lawsuit. There's the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, but there's also the Authoring Tools Accessibility Guidelines. And that's something that institutions that are forward-thinking and looking at ways to implement best practices for their content authors are looking to implement, so that you can see that content authors are guided in the process of picking the best solution for their members. ATAG is a new standard that the WC3 has implemented. It's actually it's something that I think just came out last year. Was finalized last year as part of the WC3 process. Yeah, accessibility is about removing barriers, and security is about adding them. So, another slide. This one's from Thailand, and I love both the security camera as well as the broken bottles up and down on the fence. I had a girlfriend at one point that she was walking along the fence and she didn't fall on one like that, but she had another sort of fence defense kind of system. Sort of, she fell on it and it went right through her, and fortunately she was fine. But I can't look at those kinds of security defenses without realizing the sort of harm that they can use, even for the people that they're supposed to protect. So security, web security isn't as old as web security is in many ways, because they're I think mostly it's because of the internet. The internet has really changed things. There are certainly worms and viruses before the internet, but we didn't. People were thinking about how to go off and interact with computers and how to make computers available to to blind users and other users from as soon as you invented the screen. You sort of realize that potential. Tim Berners-Lee was I think he's still a bit aghast at how inaccessible the web is, and his initial vision of the web was one that was a inclusive space for everyone to be able to engage with and interact with each other online, as opposed to people watching cat video after cat video after cat video. There's in terms of things that have come out, and the credit card industry has done a lot to try and, because of credit cards and online commerce, a lot has been done to try and move security forward. So there's PCI compliance and data security standards. I didn't actually write down the name of this, but there is a book on PCI compliance, or an ebook on PCI compliance in Drupal. So if you're interested in looking at hardening your Drupal site and doing e-commerce, it's definitely worth just searching for PCI compliance in Drupal, and I'm quite positive that this ebook will come up quite a way. I'm not sure. Does anyone is anyone else familiar with this book? No, never mind. Google for it and find it, because it's again useful to try and build on what what's being done before. And I think that all of us, the whole internet is based on standing on the shoulders of giants. So how do we find ways to go off and look at what other people's work has done and add to that and extend that? There's also OWASP. Anyone know what OWASP is? So OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project, and it's a project that's sort of looking at web applications, and it's a bunch of security experts who are looking at best practices and evaluations, and they're looking at security over time to try and say, where are we? What can we improve? What are the things that we can do to try and make security better, and where are the flaws that we're seeing in web security in particular, and sort of highlighting the top 10 reasons, or top 10 holes in web applications in 2015, and how can we go off and address those. They don't release their reports every year, but about every 2 years. And as I said, we've got our security guide that is available for download as well at openconcept.ca/security. It's also, if you want to contribute to that book, that we have that all available on GitHub, and are encouraging people to fork it and to make contributions and suggestions and pull requests to try and make that as good as it possibly can be. I was also indicating here that the part of the security camera is this is pointing at the street outside the building I was walking by. There are often times that security actually compromises privacy, and it's not just about keeping people out, but also being aware of what's going on around you and being aware of what the privacy laws are and what you need to do to, what your responsibilities are once you've gathered that personal information is quite important.
I don't think it matters. It's not even connected.
It's not connected?
If you look at the...
Good point. That's an extra good... You could just talk about how you can have these security devices, but if they're not connected, they're no use, right? Who's testing and evaluating these systems? Good point. So this is a logo that I created that combined both the active accessible icon logo over here and the universal accessibility icon here. Many people who use wheelchairs have absolutely no problems or barriers accessing the web. And so when you see a wheelchair icon on a website, is a little bit odd because most people who use wheelchairs aren't also limited on their access online. Most people don't know what this icon means though, so it's sort of one of these situations where people don't necessarily know and aren't necessarily aware of these things. How many people are using Drupal 8 here right now? Okay, not enough. So you should use Drupal 8 for accessibility because we've added WIA area, which adds additional semantics. You should use it because we've added HTML5 and have more improved semantics within it, so that you have the ability for your search engines and for your blind users and for your mobile devices to be able to understand what you're trying to convey and to parse that information correctly is much more refined and established. There's color contrast improvements. There's improvements for low vision users. I mentioned the authoring tools accessibility guideline. We've done a lot to try and include that and try and have a system to see that your content authors are guided through the process of creating accessible content. We've added views into core, which is huge because that was the one area that people who had disabilities who were using Drupal 7 could use most of the Drupal interface just fine, but when it comes to using views UI, they were blocked. And there were workarounds that they could use. You could disable JavaScript and access it that way, and then re-enable JavaScript afterwards, once you've gone off and made your commands. But it was a hacky approach that you shouldn't expect any user to disable JavaScript in order to use the interface. But it's much better now for screen reader users, as well as for people who are using other assistive technology. And also we've brought in through views more accessible tables, so that the header items are properly listed in tables, and there's IDs associated with them, so people with screen readers or bots know what cell you're in and where you are in that cell. So if you want to be able to do some fancy CSS or some JavaScript based on the cell that you're in and how it associates with the table, you've got more tools to work with. We've required alt tags so that if you're trying to again, so it's just that much. You can put images up on with Drupal 8 that don't require alt text, but it's just that much harder. So it's just like we've decided to try and add a little bit of an irritant to try and encourage people to add alt text for images, because that was the lowest hanging fruit in Drupal 7 websites, is that we'd always sort of see, oh, they forgot to add alt text when they built the website. It's all great on the accessibility front except for that. So we've built that in to try and remind authors in the default states to include those alt text for images, and that's for both CK editor as well as for the image content type, as well as for the article, the default article type. When you're creating new articles, those are things that are built in. There's inline errors, proper accessible inline errors that are enabled in Drupal. Well, they're not enabled. They're available in core, but you have to enable them. They're an experimental module. They may cause you problems. It is highly unlikely. it is being tested very thoroughly, and the problems that are coming up are largely display problems. Things that most people aren't going to notice, but it's something that it wasn't stable enough and reliable enough for us to bring into core. So we had to pull it out because core needed to be better and more robust than that. But for most individual websites, you're not going to notice if there's any problems. The problems that are occurring with enabling the inline form errors are not going to be noticed by most of your users. What else we got? So also reasons to upgrade for Drupal 8. No twig, yay! So also, sorry, let me just go back. If you're looking at Drupal 8 and sort of wanting to find out what issues are available in Drupal, there's this long thread here. If you just basically search for the accessibility tag in the issue queue, you'll find all the issues that are related. To keep an eye on your Drupal 7 and Drupal 8 security, go to drupal.org/security. You'll get updates and whatnot of what's going on. If you download your module from Git or using alpha versions or dev versions, or actually alpha versions you'll be able to get updates for. But if you're using Git versions or dev releases, you're not going to get security updates. So any of this stuff or any of the security model that we have for Drupal.org is not going to help you if you're using a dev release. So try and keep it with the latest stable releases of the project. Twig is in Drupal 8. There's a public file base in the URL, so it's harder to go off to fake the location of the server and put another server in place. There's a trusted hosted pattern, again, that makes it harder to go off and fake the host. We've removed the PHP filter. That was a bit of a battle to try and pull that out, but was well worthwhile. PHP filter does everyone know what it is? What it is in Drupal 7? It's really handy, but it's really bad. It allows you to write PHP right in nodes and in views and in so many places. It's awesome, except that it means that you've got this PHP code that isn't under version control, that's sitting in a database, that allows somebody to go off and to just make mayhem of your site and to do all kinds of other wacky stuff because PHP is executed from the database instead of from the file system. So you have no idea. You can't track any version control. You can't go off and manage it. So it's a loose cannon that thankfully we've gotten out of Drupal 8. We've got YAML configuration files in there, again, trying to go off and make sure that the configuration is trackable, that if you're making changes in your configuration, that information that can be tracked in a file system in a version control so that you can manage that, and you can also manage that more effectively when you're going from a dev to a staging to a production environment as well. There's hardened user session handling. There's automated cross-site request forgery protection that's being built into core now. And some of the stuff is getting backported to Drupal 7, but some of it can't be, and some of it just there isn't enough manpower or staff support to try and make sure that this stuff gets pushed back. All this stuff takes time, and there isn't necessarily enough time. We have cookie domains that are not restricted that have not had www.script. So if you had www. Or non-www domains that you could get through, and in effect, it's amazing the kinds of ways, the vulnerabilities that are out there for security, and innovative ways that people have found to break down security paradigms. But there's things that we can do to fix that. MySQL requests are being limited to one query per statement, so you can't go off and insert a whole stack of queries with a single request and have those insert other things into MySQL that aren't intended to be added. There's clickjacking protection, and the JavaScript API is now compliant with the WC3's content security policy. This is a lovely lake in Thailand, but I wanted to talk about the environment, because with both accessibility and security, you have to be aware of the environment and the issues that are around that are being involved in the website. It's not just the website on its own. The environment matters so much. Both of them depend on the browsers, which change. How often does Firefox? What version is Firefox on these days, anyways? Is it 40, 50, 48? Like it's changing so quickly. The development cycles are only going to get faster as people use these tools more often, and as the expectations are that these tools are updated on such a regular basis. So that affects both security and accessibility. Screen readers go and they're also updated fairly regularly, not quite as regularly as browsers most of the time, but they do get updated, and that of course only affects the accessibility community or screen reader users. If you don't. With most assistive tech, I think with all assistive technology, it's all being operated through the browser. So there is no, that I've ever heard, there's no security risk that a screen reader or other assistive technology can play to your website, because it's all being done through the browser. So everything that can be, there's no direct attacks that can be done. That might change though if screen readers start to work with services and you're able to have more direct access to if they're able to skip the web layer directly and go directly to the database and access information from the database, they should be able to go off and to skip the web layer and go directly from the screen reader to the website, in which case there would be security problems possible through the services layer. But again, you're still dealing with a standard Drupal API interface you'd be working with. Frameworks are affecting them both as well. There's all these new JavaScript frameworks that are coming out. Who's had a chance to play with React or JS? Or React.js or Angular.js? Okay, excellent. Sorry, messing those up. Those have security implications. They're massive JavaScript libraries that can have exploits in them. You're trusting other communities to make sure that there aren't going to be cross-site scripting vulnerabilities. There are going to be accessibility issues. You've got to trust that those communities, well, actually, you shouldn't trust in either case. You should be checking to see that those external libraries are vetted and that they're using best practices, and that they have people that are actually actively working to make sure that the framework that you're using is actually going to be secure and going to be accessible. If there isn't an accessibility team and a security team available in the framework you're adopting, you probably shouldn't adopt it, because this can compromise your website. And if
is there any group that would be looking at that? I mean, that would be certifying it in some way? I mean, I don't know anything. I haven't really seen that. I mean, there's sort of loose things like that, but an outside group that could make certification, things like that.
Partly, what's the point? Because it changes so regularly, right? If it didn't change, then yes. But both of them, they're changing on multiple times a year, probably more often. I mean, not all websites are being updated to use the latest version of whatever framework is being implemented. But that there's going to be new frameworks that are implemented several times a year to sort of address bugs and issues and add new features. So if it was just done once every 4 or 5 years, it might be worthwhile going off and setting up and managing a verification process to do that. But it's moving too quickly, and I don't think that for either accessibility or security that an external verification is going to do that. You're going to find that there's people out there that you can pay big money to go off and to do security and accessibility audits of your site, whatever framework you're using it on, and they might be good, and they might catch stuff, and they might go off and help you sort of identify issues, but they might not. I mean, you can spend a hell of a lot of money on stuff for people who using automated tools that may or may not go off and check what's the latest hack or the latest screen reader in order to try and to verify that this is still working and still effectively being managed. And the standards, there aren't web standards and guidelines that I'm aware of that are certified by groups like the World Wide Web Consortium. So there certainly are best practices, and we've tried to add to that and collect some of those ideas and just have a lot of references to other documents and places to go to. The HTML5 and Area both have some real advantages in terms of providing structure, but these are also potential exploits. I think that it's more semantic, so it's fairly clean, but it's just you have to be familiar with how it works and how these other systems are leveraging it and using it. WYSIWYG editors are point of accessibility problems and security problems. The number of libraries that, especially external libraries that people throw into CK Editor that may or may not have are being properly maintained, or that maybe they have PHP code attached to them, or the ability to upload files and manage them in some other way. Like, you just have to be thinking about this stuff. The user behaviors for both are also changing. Like, there's new ways to go off and hack into websites that are being distributed on the dark web and other places all the time, and they're easier for people to access, whether it's bots that are developed and shared by the Russian mafia or by the Chinese government or whoever. I mean, there's a, for that matter, the NSA, right? I mean, there's a bunch of people that are looking to go off and to collect information, and sometimes this information is distributed more widely than the original authors perhaps expected it to be. So just being aware of what the realities of the behaviors and expectations of users are, and what's actually happening and how these tools are being used. Laws and policies, they keep changing. Certainly in the U.S., it seems to be the drive is mostly based on the court system and lawsuits. But there's a real incentive to try and keep up to date with both security and accessibility, because if you screw up, you might be facing a serious lawsuit, and that could be millions of dollars, which most of us don't have. And it generally doesn't take millions of dollars to do a reasonable job securing your website. It'll never be 100% secure, but it can be very secure and quite hard to go off and to break into. And most of the time, unless you have a completely dedicated hacker, they're going to try and hit somebody they're going to hit, if you've done a good job trying to secure your website, there's going to be somebody else that the hacker is going to target in order to go off and to compromise your website and get access to your server. There's also, if you've done a reasonable job making your website accessible, if somebody's going to be suing you based on problems with you accessing your website, if you've done most of what's in WK 2.0 AA and are making a reasonable effort to try and make your website accessible, probably they're going to go off and go to somebody else who doesn't have alt tags enabled, who has completely inaccessible old web forms. There's easier targets to hit. So just keep pushing to see that you are not the lowest on the totem pole for both security and accessibility, and you'll probably be okay with lawsuits and hacks. Probably, maybe not. The more you put into it, the less risky you're going to be. But it's a measure of risk aversion. How risk averse is your organization? Most universities, most government institutions are fairly risk averse in many ways. That should carry through to both accessibility and to security. Unfortunately, it doesn't always seem to. I've already mentioned baby boomers. That's a big one for accessibility. As far as I know, there aren't that many baby boomers who are getting involved in hacking, so it's probably not a big risk issue on the hacking front. Legacy code is something that's a real problem both as well. There's far too many websites that have old code that presents security issues and accessibility issues. Email and managing email is a big problem as well for security, and mobile sites as well. Like there's things you need to be aware of when thinking about these devices and systems. The more if you have a site that has something on it that people can steal, whether it's credit cards or email addresses or contacts, the more valuable your site is, the more likely it is to be compromised. So be aware of what's on your website, and if you have things of value, make sure that you're doing as much as you can to try and protect it. Also with security, backup, and then test your backups. There's too much on both of these to try and address them individually. It's about trying to have best practices and maintain those best practices. This is the lawn of our Parliament buildings in Ottawa, and there are people doing yoga. So that was brilliant. There's also a video on there on YouTube of Tyrannosaurus rexes doing yoga right here. That's really worth searching if you like Tyrannosaurus rexes doing anything in unison. So it's brilliant. But as far as accessibility in Drupal, accessibility in general, if you start with Drupal, you're going to be more secure, or more accessible. you're going to go off and be able to leverage the APIs. You're going to go off and have, be able to sort of make best practices of either using the core themes like Classy or good contributed themes like Zen and Adaptive Theme. Those are good ways to try and see that your website is as accessible as possible. Testing is critical, and also contributing back is really important. There's a lot of times where people don't contribute back bugs or don't sort of look upstream. You're not going to solve the issues if you don't push things upstream. It's also really important to try and engage people with disabilities. There's a lot of times where the accessibility community doesn't go off and reach out and find people who have disabilities to try and learn from and get a better appreciation of it. It doesn't matter if all your automated tests come back green. If the people who have disabilities are having trouble accessing your website, it's a barrier that you need to deal with. So as far as security goes, best practices, start with a secure environment. If you've got an old server that you're not sure if it's secure, just start with a new server. Make sure you have a client, or if you're getting a new server, please don't have them email your root password via a plain text email. There are better ways to deal with this, and whoever your ISP is should know about better ways to go out and set up and manage that infrastructure. Use Drupal, use stable releases of packages where you can, leverage the API, realize that when you're creating code and creating custom code, all code is debt. And at some point, somebody needs to pay that and maintain that. And so try and contribute to existing projects where possible so that you don't have code that you're having to maintain and you're the only one bearing the burden of maintaining that code base. Separate code from presentation. Jumping to Twig is definitely going to help with security on that front. And subscribe to the Drupal security updates. How many people use Slack here? So Slack can actually give you updates. You can subscribe to the RSS feed on Drupal.org and have Slack inform you when there's security updates that are available on a weekly basis. Just make it easy and simple for everyone to access this. Yes, I included a kitten Slack. There's freeze and beer, freeze and speech. I prefer freeze and kittens. We have to go off and it is free code, but just like free kittens, if you don't nurture it, if you don't love it, if you don't take care of it, if you don't change its litter box, if you don't look after that animal and see that the living force within that is respected and trained and supported, you're going to have a hell of either a dead cat or a really terrible, misbehaving, rotten cat on your hands. So try and if you want these projects to be things that are projects that you can support and nurture through the lifetime of your website, make sure that you're nurturing the code base and nurturing the community that's behind that. And coming to events like this and coming to the Code Sprint tomorrow are definitely great ways to try and do that. So Drupal accessibility, there's opportunities in Drupal 8.2 and Drupal 9 to try and improve things. There's an issue queue that you can look at and features and bugs and great ways to get involved there. There's a number of outstanding accessibility issues to look at and big accessibility challenges. Lots of patches that need to get reviewed and summaries that need to get updated and documentation that needs to be written. So much work that needs to be done. With security, there's certainly a lot of work that needs to be done there as well. It's not as open and available for people to access and not something that as many people can contribute to, but with the Drupal security guide that we posted, there's again opportunities to get involved there, and also through the issue queue, looking at the security list. If there's things you want to test or things you want to get involved in, the Drupal community, even the elusive security folks are wonderful and have a lot of guidance and direction that they can give you. And that's it. Thank you for your time. Any questions? The earlier you think about both of them, the easier it's going to be. So, but.
So I use Drush.
Yeah.
And is there a way to, I know we don't want to have automatic security updates kind of like WordPress does, but is there a way to set up something so where I see there's a security update and I can run a Drush command and something on the server will go and apply that update?
Yep.
I mean, I know I can run a command to update Drupal. Is there any way of automating it more than that?
Well, there's, I mean, beyond Drupal up or Drupal up, there's a one-line command that goes off and updates core and updates modules that have security releases. I don't know that there's an easier way to do that. I mean, you could just set that on a cron job to go off and update at a regular basis,
Yeah.
which would work probably, but you wouldn't necessarily want to do that because then if there's an update that breaks your website, you might want to do that on testing or staging, so to have that regularly done and to evaluate that. But yeah. Any other questions?
You said that Section 508 is irrelevant or out now, and I don't know how to look up W2K 2.0 WA. It's not get anything. What?
WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
What? WC?
AG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines.
Okay.
Sorry, it's not, ideally all acronyms are easily pronounceable,
Yeah.
and WCAG and WCAG and like there's a number of different pronunciations for it.
Okay.
But
Okay. Thanks.
Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's part of the WC3, the World Wide Web Consortium.
All right. Got it. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks again.